Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm really excited to be here today. I do have a few different things that I want to talk about, but I do want to let you know that I'm most excited to hear questions and sort of think about things with all of the viewers and listeners today, and sort of think through what it might look like in your school and within your district. I am a co-director of blended learning in Denver Public Schools, and one of my favorite pieces of that is that I get to work directly both with schools as well as with sort of district departments on how we think about what blended and personalized learning looks like at the school level, at the district level. And so we're sort of looking at it from this perspective of what is your blend for personalization, because we have framed blended learning as the method by which we personalize. We don't see them as the same thing, because we're actually thinking about sort of the strategic use of technology to do some personalization. But before we go into sort of the way we framed it, as well as our sort of needs assessment, and at the end of this you'll see a template that you can use in your school or district to do some needs assessment around what it looks like within your school or district. But I want to think about and take a step back and think about the story of how we frame blended learning. So I tend to go back to a, I would say, very early story for the way that I've been thinking about this. And I did use Haiku Deck. I saw somebody mention that in the chat. But the story that I come back to again and again is the story of when I was a kid. I used to make the absolute worst Kool-Aid in the world, and I would keep on putting more and more sugar, more and more of like the sugary substance that you get in the Kool-Aid container, and I kept on putting it in, thinking it was going to get better and better, and I would make my friends drink it because I was like, oh, this is so sweet and wonderful, and none of my friends wanted to drink it. And I feel the same way about talking about both blended or technology integration in general, is that we just keep on making it sweeter and sweeter. We keep on adding more and more, or we pick one flavor and we keep on saying, you know, this is the one and only flavor that we could possibly choose. It's blended, or it's technology integrated, or this is the model that we are going with, and it really saying that that is the only thing that exists, and sort of denying all of the others that they have any validity. And to me, it's much more important to do better than just sweet. But I'm also not interested in sort of throwing everything in. This picture is of throwing hamburgers into sort of the Vitamix and sort of blending that around and saying that is our blended learning. We're going to throw a little bit of pedagogy, a little bit of technology. We're going to throw in all of the different elements that we think, you know what, that's what a classroom is, and you know, you're going to hit the mix button, and then that's going to come out with something that is strategic and intentional. And I think what we learned and have continue to learn within DPS is that you can't do either one flavor, one note, and you can't do everything. Right? We have to think about a better definition, a better purpose for blended learning. And so I like to think about it like the way that you would blend tea. So if you're a tea drinker, you know that the places like Teavana or someplace where you know, Pete's Tea, you go in and you get the loose leaf tea and you put it together and say, you know, this is, I want notes of, you know, mint, or, you know, I want some chamomile in here. And I am choosing these because I want a particular experience. I want a learning experience that has these particular elements because that's the kind of school that I have. And we saw this again and again in the different schools that we've worked with, is that everyone already has a vision for their school. They already have a sense of who they are. And to come in and say, you have to do it like this doesn't actually work and doesn't make sense. So allowing them to choose their blend makes a lot more sense. So if you're not a tea drinker and you think about coffee, you think about the Starbucks that you go to, they have choice roasters and sort of people who go through and actually choose what are the beans and what's the right mix of beans, to think about what is the right blend for me. And although on the East Coast it may be time for this, it's not quite in Colorado. If you're looking at it from the wine blend perspective, right? There are some blends that are perfect for a summer day or perfect for a late afternoon. And that's what we're looking for, is the intentional shift from throwing everything in or only looking at it from one perspective. And so what does that look like? To me, the way that you get this done is by shifting the purpose, right? And this is one of my favorite quotes from the Purpose Ed movement and project, where they said education can and probably should look different for every student. And that's how we get to this idea of a personalized learning environment. We need a better purpose for blended learning than just saying, how do we get technology into the classroom? We need a better purpose for saying, how do we have sort of these tools in the classroom, and how do we use them effectively? And so in creating that better purpose, we get to have conversations that are more important. We get to have conversations around the learner's blend, where the learner is actually the one that is owning it, or the teacher who is designing the classroom is the one that owns it, and it is their blend. And so, to me, this is what we started with, right? This was our sort of framing, our framework. What is a personalized learning environment? It's using real-time data to create an adaptive learning path within these spaces. So I think about these three different spaces as there's an instructional and collaborative space, there's an online and physical space, or excuse me, it's an instructional and collaborative use of people, an online and physical use of space, and a synchronous and asynchronous use of time, where content and expertise are matched to need. So there's a lot going on in this diagram itself, but I like to think about making the choices. And when you are planning, when you are choosing what you want in your learner's blend, you get to say, I want an instructional use of people, I want some direct instruction, I want a physical use of space, and I want a synchronous use of time. That's more traditional, right? That's a traditional classroom. We would have an instructional use of people, direct instruction, the physical use of space, and then it's the synchronous, right? It's everyone in the same place at the same time. But what would it look like if we had a collaborative use of the people, where the expertise could come from other students and the content could come from really great providers online, and the space is both online and physical, where you do have some instructional tasks being done online, some done in the physical space, and that it could be done over time within a learning management system or within a collaborative document. And I like to think about the experience that I had as a 7th and 8th grade English teacher in the very early days of Google Docs, even before it was Google Docs, where there was a student, we were doing a project, and we had a project where they were creating a utopian society. And they were describing all of the different roles within this society, and everybody in the group had to pick their role. And one of my students was absent that day, but was able to log on and add their ideas to the document before class started, so she got the role that she wanted. And so she was using a collaborative use of people. She was using the online space, and both synchronous and asynchronous. She was able to attend the class from home, but also able to preempt what other people were saying and thinking about throughout that lesson. And so that was sort of the very early days of my thinking on this. And then we started to think about, and I started to think about, how does this scale? How do you create change on the larger scale? And to me, it's about choosing the right ands, the right ors, and the right withs. So if I'm doing an instructional and collaborative use of people, if I am doing a online or physical use of space, am I doing, where are the curriculum, the content, and expertise coming from? Who am I doing this learning with? And by making those choices, we get to create the learner's blend, But it's important to think about the systems to support that learner's blend. And so this is where we come into the IT systems. This is where we came to the perspective of what do we need from ed tech? What do we need from the different curriculum departments? What do we need to make sure is in place in the classroom and in the school to make this happen? And so I want to talk about the different questions that we ask teachers and principals in order to get at these systems. So the question that I love to ask is, where do you go when you need to ask a question, whether that's a curriculum question, whether that's a pedagogical question, where do you go? And so to me, the system that we need that is required to create this personalized learning environment is a communication, collaboration, and sharing system. To me, that's a really important point. The system that we have chosen to go with for the most part is Google Apps for Education, and thinking about how do we use it as a part of and integrated with all of the other tools. The next question I ask is, how do you know what best practice is? We talk a lot about best practice, but we actually don't typically think about where does best practice come from. And actually, one of the big pieces here is that the system that's required is an assessment, content, tools, and process system. So if we think about it, so where is the content being curated and talked about? Where is assessment being shared? What are the tools and processes where you're actually documenting best practice? And I like to think about, how does good practice become best practice? And to me, the way in which it happens is through sharing and discussion. And so how do you reflect upon your learning? Well, you're probably going to do that through a learning exemplar or e-portfolio system. How are you reflecting upon the learning? How do you typically show the progress that's being made? The next question I ask is, how do you know where you are in your learning? So how do you see your data? How do you see a dashboard of all of the information? How do you know where you are as a learner? And as a teacher, how do you know where your students are in their learning? The next question that I typically ask, and that we did through the needs assessment that you'll see in a second, how do you create the communities of interest and need? How are you creating those dynamic groups within the classroom, and how are you doing classroom management? So to me, the way in which you ask these questions are pretty important. Like, you could ask this question, sort of have this large discussion, but having an actual plan, a way in which you assess the needs, both current and future state, is going to get you a lot further. So to me, those dynamic groups can happen by self-selection, right? It's interest, or by we realize there's a need, and we're going to create those groups and those communities around those groups. The next question I ask is, how do you know what comes next in your learning? So you have to see the full path, and there are a lot of tools that allow for this to happen. Actually, one of the sponsors of this particular webinar, Dreambox Learning, has this way where kids, and particularly young kids, can see a learning path. It's not the only tool that does that, but it's one that actually does it pretty well. My children, I have a 5- and a 7-year-old, who use Dreambox, and so they're able to see the learning path as they go through and make some choices about what they want to do next, right? About what they are seeing as a need, and particularly to that idea of choice, student choice, and then teacher choice, that you can sort of guide the path forward. The adaptive aspect of this, right? How do you provide for those choices? If you are simply saying, this beginning assessment that we did at the beginning of the year is going to provide the entirety of the path, then you're not allowing for students who really can accelerate or who need remediation. And how do you actually provide those choices in the adaptive lesson planning system, so that when teachers are making the lessons, that it's not one path through it, but that it is a branching system? I love that the slides are making you hungry. That's hopefully a good thing. To the comment of that my flow is fast, that's why these are hopefully recorded and you get to watch them again. But my hope is that when you are providing choice and allowing for students and teachers to have those choices, that it isn't a false choice, that you're actually giving them the opportunity to move forward and backward. And so then the final question that you come to is, what is your learner's blend? What is your classroom learner's blend? What is your school? And what is your district? And by making some of these choices together and those intentional choices, you get to have some of those conversations. So my information is here. That's who I am, Ben Wilkoff. But the template for the blended learning needs assessment is at bit.ly/blended needs. And so if you join me in that doc, and I'll see as people do start to join, you'll notice that there is a number of these essential questions. They're mapped to sort of the different systems, so learning management system, communication, collaboration, and sharing, and then this idea of what are the current and future states. So to me, this is kind of a way of framing it. The only other things that are in this template that are not in the presentation itself is the budget and technology questions down at the bottom, and then the support and professional development questions, which are also below. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this. This is, obviously something that I'm very passionate about. Obviously I'm willing to stay on and have lots of conversations around it. But more than anything is, how do we create a learner's blend for the different environments that we are in, so that we are moving from this conversation of what is technology integration, or how do we do OneNote, or all of the things together, to really be focused on what it is that we can be making choices around. So I really appreciate your time, and that's it for me.